I wanted to propose a question regarding physiques. Now, there's a lot of things you can say about how people are built, but is there really an objective way to say what's a good physique and what isn't? Is there really a way to blatantly say that no matter how you put it, someone is built great or perfectly? That's what I aim to hopefully, figure out or explain or understand. Because I myself, as someone who is a bigger dude, I quite honestly just look like the third dude in the second picture. But as someone of that size, I myself find myself wondering what makes a physique good? Do I even have a good physique? Am I too big? Am I too small? Those are just some questions that I would love to have answered, but part of me don't part of me doesn't think that they will get answered or that they need to be answered. My first case to make about physiques is that abs aren't everything. And you don't need to be super lean or super sculpted to have a good physique. Of course, it helps a lot, but it always will be opinion based. Brian Shaw, one of the best strongmen to ever do it, didn't have abs till near he retired or after he retired. And it's because he was focusing all the way on strength, getting as strong as he can to win World's Strongest Man and other competitions like Giants Live. But the issue there is that most people would look at him and think that's not a good physique. But some people will. Some people say, wow, he's a monster. Some people would wish to have strength like that. I myself wouldn't mind to look like Brian Shaw. Of course, I would barely be able to live at my height and at his weight. But having his shape and his build, I would love that personally. But some people may think it's ugly. Some people may think he looks amazing. It just depends, really. But I don't think that him not having abs changes much, because you can just look at him and think, wow, that's a big muscular dude. You don't. I feel like a lot of people get it messed up, where people think that if you have abs on a washboard body or a super tiny little body, then that just means you have a good physique, when I really disagree. And I don't think you need to have that kind of physique to be successful either. Like Dusty Rhodes, who is one of the most successful wrestlers of all time, and what's now known as WWE and everything, but he looked like garbage, but he was still so successful and people still loved him. People thought he was great. It's not all about the aesthetics, I guess is what I'm trying to say. As much as people try to force looks maxing now and everything, aesthetics aren't really everything. At least I don't think so. Some people may think that's all there is to these builds, but I think it goes far beyond that. Much like I was talking about how big people can be, like Brian Shaw, size isn't everything. Sometimes amazing physiques come from small people. People love how Brad Pitt looked in a lot of his movies, and some people just think that he looked super good back in his prime, where he was looking, quite lean and quite slim in just about everything, and even now people still admire that and wish they looked like that. And another example is Kazushi Sakuraba, who himself was a very small man, winning fights against big people, winning fights against people he shouldn't have beat at such a small size in Pride FC that you would never, ever, ever understand how he could pull things off, but he did. And he was not a big guy at all. And he wasn't a jack dude either. He pushed and he was working so hard. And I think what people don't realize is that sometimes you don't look the role. Sometimes you don't need to look a certain way to fit a role. And Sakuraba is one of those people who could do so many things with such a small and what some people would think looks incapable body, because he looks just about like everyone else, just average. But we're doing very above average things. And everyone's unique. Not everyone's going to be able to look like everyone else. Just because you like how someone looks doesn't mean you can be like them, and just because other people look better than you don't mean that you can't perform better than them. Now, of course, Antonio Inoki is a very well-known man and very, very successful man. And he had a great physique of his own. And of course, he had that nice giant chin. But the things he did, were incredibly impressive. But one thing I want to talk about was in business, You'd never expect a guy like him would be such a great businessman, but he was. And I know that's a very stupid point to make. But I do feel like a lot of people who have such great physiques are usually expected to be very much into that world. A lot of people would think that they're active gym goers, or that they're maybe even fighters, because of course Antonio Inoki was, but that's not the point I'm making. It's just that even in circumstances where you'd usually find somebody who's just normal or doesn't have to look a certain way, that's where some of the freaks shine, because Antonio Inoki had no reason to look like this after a while, but he still did. And he still pushed it, and he still cared about how he looked. And, I mean, look at the guy. Like, you'd love to fish with this fella. And, Cain Velasquez was not a big dude, and he was not, especially for heavyweight back in the time, and he was not a very well-built dude. He was quite flabby. Yet you'd look at this dude and not realize that he whooped Brock Lesnar. And I think Cain is an amazing example on how you can look like a tub of lard and still be an amazing fighter or amazing performer in anything you do. I wouldn't mind having the skills of Cain Velasquez. I don't think anybody would. But yet, more people would rather want his skills and how he looks, because he simply doesn't look great. And I don't think he could control that, because I think he looked about as good as he possibly could have, especially in his profession. And that's one reason why I think the entirety of looks maxing is quite stupid, because you can't always look a certain way that you should be expected to look. Every looks maxer on the planet wouldn't stand 1 minute with Cain Velasquez, Sometimes you just gotta look the way you look, and you can't always control that. Great topic to go into. I made the slideshow not that long ago, and I actually forgot I made this slide. The sport matters. The sport you're in matters a lot in terms of how you look. We have 3 people: George St. Pierre, Usain Bolt, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And one thing I know about all of them is that they are amazing for their sports. Quite possibly the best at each one. Arnold, he looked exactly how he should have. He won the competitions exactly how he should have. Of course, there's a bit of an asterisk on some of them. But look at the guy. I mean, for the things that he legitimately did win, he deserved 100% and got himself so perfect to a T that I don't think anyone will ever beat that shape, ever. But just because he is that big and does look that way doesn't make it any better than the other physiques here, because the sport matters. In bodybuilding, yes, the other 2 would lose to Arnold, but in those other sports, Arnold would lose to them. Usain Bolt, I don't think I have to explain who Usain Bolt is, but he was not necessarily a looker. He wasn't big. He couldn't have been big. He couldn't have. And he wasn't necessarily aesthetic, but he sure was amazing, perfect, the best at his sport, because he had to be, because he trained to be, because his genetics were given to him by God to be this way. And he looked exactly like how he should have, because he was, and probably still is, the greatest. And I think what people don't consider a lot of the times when they talk about how they think someone looks is that not everyone is going to fit your standards for the things that you expect out of somebody. Sometimes people are trying to be the best at a sport and are going to look like such. They're not always going to look like bodybuilders or influencers. George St. Pierre is a great example. Dude was in the 170 weight class welterweight and was the best, unbeatable. Of course, he did lose to Matt Serra and Matt Hughes, but he got that back 100 times over when he crushed both of them next time they fought. And he looked great. He was actually a bit undersized for the weight class, but his skill is what pushed him further and what kept him in the position he was. Although a lot of people would say that other physiques in the UFC are actually more aesthetic. And I think that's a really stupid take because the sport of MMA isn't about who's most aesthetic. It's about who is the best and who beats who. And George Pierre beats the who of the who. I always hear this crap about Leon Edwards, but Leon Edwards is not unbeatable by any means, and Leon Edwards can never be considered one of the greatest. George St. Pierre is in contention for the greatest of all time because he trained for that. He allowed his body to morph himself into that. And I would have never expected him to be a different way because I think he was perfect for the position he was in. I don't give a single F about whether or not he was aesthetic. I mean, of course he looked great, but in any of his fights, that's not the point. That's why the sport matters a lot, because you can't look at these people and be like, oh, but they look like this, they look like that. If they objectively are training correctly for their sport and represent their sport, that should technically mean they have a good physique in their context. But yet some people will look at these three people and say Arnold has the best physique. But that's because of the content they consume. Some people might say Usain Bolt because they consume more content like the stuff he performed in. Some may say George St. Pierre because they watch a lot more fighting, watch a lot more boxing and MMA, and lean towards those kinds of physiques. It really does just depend on the sport that we're talking about and in what context does it make sense. Now this page might at first glance not make any sense, but the point I want to make here is that the human body is so interesting, and the fact that we can even be built in such ways gives so much leeway to artists and creativity on pushing them to their limits while making them make sense. What's shown here are humanoid bodies that have all been morphed in such a way that represents what an artist wanted them to look like. And I think it's a beautiful thing how we can morph our own bodies into drawings that look nothing like their original, design by God. But the only reason we have this opportunity is because we are built different as people, because we are able to build these kinds of physiques and muscles and simply express them in different ways through different media. And of course, the medium you're doing it in matters because when it comes to art, you can do basically whatever you want. But it's just the fact that we still choose to stick to these muscles that we can build and have. There's always some realism to these, more than you might realize, because as hard as it would be to look like anybody here, I mean, maybe the Croc, but he was kind of a joke character I put in here, but as hard as it would be to look like someone like Baki, he still has muscles you could find on a person. And I think that's the most beautiful thing ever, because you can morph our own bodies into however you want in so many different ways. And this would be impossible. These kinds of physiques that we look at would be impossible if we couldn't build one ourselves. If we didn't have the opportunity to build muscle, if everyone looked the same way, we wouldn't have these outlets to play around with how we can represent characters in media Think about a character like Goku. Imagine if everyone looked the same, was fat. We'd have nothing else to go off of. We'd have nothing to exaggerate. But the fact that we can look certain ways and the fact that people can be so built can let us push our own creativity further. I think a great example, yeah, of course, is Maki, because everyone's built like insane in there. But you can think of also fighting games. You can think of so many things where exaggeration can occur just because of the fact that it starts with an idea. The idea is our own bodies. And we can see through media how much we can push that, how further from realism can we get. And of course, some people are going to want things to look more real. But look at some of these older 2000s comics or anime where things are just so larger than life and exaggerated and cool. I think it's great. I honestly do. I think the greatest medium we have isn't just art styles, but it's how far you can push how the human body can look and appear in your own comics, your own anime, your own cartoons, your own shows, your own video games, all of that. Now, my last point I wanted to make is that this video is basically pointless because there is no good physiques. Nothing makes a good physique because it will always be a debate. Everyone will always argue over what's better than something else. No one will ever come to a conclusion on why what they think is best is best. They just have opinions, and you can say all you want about this or about that, but the next person you ask will have a completely different opinion. And I think it honestly will always be like that. There is no objective best physique, and there's no objective thing that I think needs to belong on someone to make them look good, because people can look good with any kind of weird build possible. Don't listen to the people online. Don't listen to looks maxers. It's all nonsense, because it's all based off opinions. You can be the ugliest person ever, and someone would still find fascination with how you're built. Or you can be the most insane, huge, strong monster known to man, and people will still find a way to hate that. Physiques will never be objective because they can always change and always evolve and always look different due to genetics over time. And that's something that I wish more people would understand. Never compare yourself to others, because if you do, it will simply take all the joy from your own physique away. And never try to be somebody you're not, because you do not know how far you can take yourself. Train for what you want to train for and get good at it. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket and think you'll look like Brock Lesnar within 2 years, because you won't, because you're not Brock Lesnar. You're you, and you should continue to be you and stop letting people tell you that you can't or that you gotta be a different way.